A homeless boy shouted at a millionaire, "Don't eat that, your wife put poison in it." The wife, nervous, humiliated, and hit the boy, saying, "Dirty little kid, stay away from us, you have no idea what you're talking about." Minutes later, the woman tucked a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear as she checked the time on her expensive wristwatch. She looked impatient, glancing around with an expression of barely concealed distaste. Next to her, her husband was scrolling through a document on his phone, completely absorbed in the screen. They looked out of place in that dirty, noisy environment, too pristine, as if an invisible bubble shielded them from the misery surrounding them. Suddenly, a ragged-looking boy approached slowly, his head lowered, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Tomas was thin, his pale skin visible beneath the layer of grime covering him, and his shoes were barely holding together. He hadn't eaten in days, and the hunger felt like a knot tightening in his stomach, robbing him of his strength. "Ma'am, sir," he began, his voice barely audible but clear. "Could you give me something to eat? I haven't eaten in days. I can wash your car or do anything you need, just a little food, please." The woman looked at him as though she had just seen a plague. She stepped back, frowning and wrinkling her nose with a gesture of profound disdain. "Dirty kid, stay away from me," she said in a sharp voice, full of disgust. "Don't even think about coming closer, you stink. Don't touch me, you'll make me dirty." Tomas stepped back a little, but his eyes kept pleading for help. He was too hungry to give up, and the woman's words seemed to echo in his mind, each insult stabbing into his soul like a blow. But he forced himself to stay firm. The woman, seeing his persistence, rummaged through her designer handbag and pulled out a coin. She looked at it for a moment, as if weighing whether the simple act of giving alms could somehow contaminate her. Finally, with a disdainful air, she tossed the coin into a muddy puddle in front of them. "There you go," she said, crossing her arms with a cynical smile. "But pick it up with your mouth." Tomas stared at the coin in the puddle, his cheeks flushing red with shame. He knew he was being humiliated, that the woman was taking pleasure in making him feel insignificant. He looked at the man, hoping he would intervene, but he merely watched, a faint expression of discomfort on his face, not daring to say a word. Perhaps he was used to letting his wife have the final say in situations like this. Swallowing his pride, Tomas crouched down to pick up the coin. He knew that if he took it, he could at least buy a small piece of bread or something to ease his hunger. Slowly, he bent toward the puddle and reached out for the coin when the woman, with unexpected quickness, kicked it, sending the coin flying away. "With your mouth," I said, she exclaimed, with a cruel smile. "Can't you even listen?" Tomas stumbled back, catching himself on the ground with one hand to avoid falling, as he felt the shame burn his face. Tears began to well up in his eyes, but he made an enormous effort to hold them back. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing him cry. He looked at the woman, who still stared at him with contempt, and then at the man, who averted his gaze, unable to meet his eyes. "I just asked for a little food," Tomas murmured, his voice breaking, barely audible. "And I gave you money, kid." "But it seems you can't even do something as simple as picking it up," the woman replied, turning away as though the scene was no longer worth her time. The man finally spoke, in a low, somewhat embarrassed tone, "Let's go already, there's no point staying here." Tomas watched as they walked away, his heart pounding with both anger and sadness. He felt tears finally escape his eyes, rolling down his cheeks and mixing with the dirt on his face. That coin, his only hope of eating something, now lay on the ground, dirty, trampled, out of reach. He had tried to be dignified, to offer something in return, but they had treated him worse than an animal. At that moment, as he watched the wealthy couple walk away, something began to burn inside him. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, a mix of fury and desperation, as if all the humiliations he had suffered on the streets, all the nights of hunger and cold, were accumulating in that instant. The image of the woman, with her cruel smile and poisonous words, was etched in his mind like a scar that would never fade. Suddenly, he saw her reach into a bag and hand it to her husband. It was a food bag, and the man took it without suspecting anything, ready to enjoy it as they continued on their way. And then, unable to hold back, Tomas felt the words burst from his mouth, a scream filled with all the pain he had accumulated in his short life, all the rage that was now boiling inside him. "Don't eat that food," he shouted with all his might, his voice echoing in the street. "Your wife put poison in it." The couple stopped dead in their tracks. Tomas' shout hung in the air like a warning full of truth and pain. The couple froze, bewildered by the accusation from a street child they barely knew. The man, holding the food bag his wife had just handed him, furrowed his brow and slowly turned toward Tomas, looking at him with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "What are you saying, brat?" the man asked, trying to maintain his composure, but there was concern creeping into his eyes. "I saw it," Tomas said, breathing heavily, his eyes burning with an intensity rarely seen in a child. "I saw your wife when she was in the restaurant, and what she did." The woman, nervous, grabbed her husband's arm and tried to drag him toward the car. "Don't listen to him," she said, her voice trembling, trying to downplay the situation. "He's just a filthy kid trying to get attention." The man hesitated, his eyes moving from his wife to Tomas, and a look of growing suspicion appeared on his face. "What did you see, kid?" he asked, ignoring his wife's insistence to leave. Tomas took a deep breath and recalled what he had seen a few hours earlier. After another day without finding enough to eat, he had sat outside the fancy restaurant, hoping some customer would discard some food, any leftovers that could ease his hunger. He saw many people leaving with bags, some full, others half empty, and watched with eyes trained by need, waiting for the opportunity to get closer. Then he saw the woman. She was wearing sunglasses, an expensive coat, and her hair was impeccably styled. When she entered the restaurant, she acted like any other customer, confident, aloof, as if the place were just an extension of her luxurious life. Tomas thought she would walk past, but after a few minutes, he saw her exit with a bag in hand. However, something caught his attention. Before returning to her car, the woman took a small bottle from her purse, looked around, and, believing no one was watching, poured the contents into the food bag, carefully mixing the food so that the substance blended in unnoticed. Then, she sealed the bag with the same elegance she used to adjust her coat and, without a second thought, threw the empty bottle into a nearby trash can. Tomas hadn't fully understood it at the time, but something inside him told him that something wasn't right. The scene left him with an unease he couldn't ignore. Now, in front of them, he recalled every detail of what he had seen and understood that he had to warn the man. "I saw what your wife did," Tomas repeated, his voice firm. "I saw her put something in the food and throw the bottle away. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't good. She didn't want anyone to see." The man looked at his wife, his eyes now filled with suspicion. The woman tried to hold his gaze, but the fear on her face was evident. "What are you talking about?" she said, pretending to be indignant. "This kid doesn't know what he's saying. He's just a poor, miserable brat trying to get attention." Tomas felt his heart pounding, but he didn't look away. He couldn't stay silent now, not after what he had seen. "I'm not lying," he insisted, looking at the man with a mix of courage and desperation. "Please, listen to me. I don't want anything from you. I'm just telling you the truth." The man, still confused, looked at his wife with an expression of doubt. "Is it true what he says? Did you do something to this food?" he asked quietly, each word carrying an invisible weight that was beginning to overwhelm him. The woman stiffened, trying to regain her composure, and forced a smile. "Of course not. This is ridiculous. Are you really going to believe this filthy kid? Look at him. He probably can't even tell the difference between food and trash." The man hesitated, but something in his eyes showed that Tomas' words had struck a chord. He looked at the food bag in his hands and felt a growing suspicion he couldn't ignore. Seeing the doubt in the man's face, Tomas moved a little closer. "Please, I'm just warning you," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper, but filled with sincerity. "I don't know why she would do something like that, but I saw it with my own eyes." If you don't believe me, check the trash can next to the restaurant. That's where she threw the bottle. The man hesitated for a moment, then, without saying a word, looked at his wife with distrust. She tried to stay calm, but there was a crack in her expression, a slight tremor that betrayed her fear. "This is absurd," she murmured, not daring to look him in the eye. "Are you really going to let a kid like him influence you?" "A kid who has nothing to gain by lying," the man replied, and his words made the woman pale. Suddenly, the air between them thickened with invisible tension, as if each word was breaking through a fragile layer of lies and secrets they had both upheld for years. Finally, the man dropped the bag, letting it fall to the ground, and took a step back, distancing himself from his wife. Tomas' gaze met his, and in those brief seconds, they seemed to share an understanding, an unexpected and silent connection. Tomas stepped back, feeling that he had done the right thing, even if he didn't know what the outcome would be. The woman glared at him with hatred, a contained fury that showed how the boy had unraveled her life in a matter of seconds. "This isn't over," the woman murmured, her words barely audible but loaded with threat. The man didn't respond. He glanced at Tomas one last time, then, without saying a word, turned his back on his wife and began walking toward the darkness of the street. The night moved on in silence, the air thick with a heavy, dense tension as the couple walked away from Tomas without another word. Tomas stood still, watching them, with a mixture of sadness and confusion in his chest. He had never imagined that something he said could affect people so different from him, so far removed from his world. But there they were, walking with an invisible distance between them, as if each step pulled them farther apart. The man finally stopped, still with his head down, as if trying to process what had just happened. He glanced sideways at his wife, who continued walking ahead of him, and then, with a bitter expression, turned back to Tomas, who was still there, watching from a distance. "Why did you do it?" the man asked, without getting closer. His voice held an air of incomprehension, as if he were trying to make sense of a street child's warning who owed him nothing, neither to him nor anyone else. Tomas blinked, surprised by the question. He felt a lump in his throat, but tried to speak with the sincerity that he so rarely found in the adults he knew. "I did it because I saw something strange," he murmured, not taking his eyes off the man. "I don't want anything from you, I saw what she did, and I thought you had the right to know." The man nodded slowly, as if processing each word. His gaze was intense, but also sad, as if that revelation had made him remember something painful. Meanwhile, his wife had started to turn around, impatient with the conversation her husband was having with that filthy child, as she had called him. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, she returned with a look of utter coldness. "Are you still listening to this kid's lies?" she asked, looking at him with disdain. "He's just a kid with no future. What he said makes no sense." "Maybe he doesn't have a home or a family," the man responded, with a cold tone that surprised even Tomas, "but he seems more honest than you've been in years." The woman frowned, and for a moment, she seemed vulnerable, as if those words had pierced her facade. But she quickly regained her arrogance and retorted, her voice trembling with rage and desperation. "Are you really going to take the side of a stranger, a street kid, instead of your own wife? After everything we've been through?" "What exactly have we been through?" he replied, fixing his eyes on her. "Because after what this kid said, I'm not sure of anything anymore, and honestly, I'm starting to think I don't know who you are." Tomas watched the exchange, feeling uncomfortable, as if he were witnessing something he shouldn't. It was painful to see how the relationship of these two people was crumbling before him, and though he had been the one to set this situation in motion, he couldn't help but feel a pang of compassion for both of them. The woman took a deep breath, as if searching for the words that would save her from the situation. "Please, darling, you're misunderstanding everything. It doesn't make sense that I would want to hurt you," she tried, her voice full of a softness that had been absent until now. "You know how much I love you. It's just that this kid is trying to cause problems, probably to get some money or attention." But the man no longer seemed willing to accept any more explanations. He walked toward Tomas, who instinctively took a step back. However, the man stopped, and there was something in his gaze beyond anger, something Tomas couldn't decipher. "Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" the man asked suddenly, surprising both Tomas and his wife. It was a simple question, but it carried a genuine concern that shocked the boy. "No," Tomas answered, his voice barely audible. "I sleep on the street, wherever it's quiet." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Would you like to come home tonight?" he asked, not taking his eyes off him. "Just for one night. I want to talk to you. I want to know what you saw and why you said what you said." The woman's eyes widened in horror. "Are you crazy? You're going to bring him to our house? You have no idea where he's been, who he is." "Maybe not," the man replied, not looking at her, "but I know he told me the truth tonight, something you couldn't do." Tomas hesitated. He knew accepting the man's offer could mean trouble or, worse, getting caught up in a situation he couldn't control. But he also knew it was a unique opportunity to spend at least one night under a roof, something that hadn't happened in a long time. "If you want," he finally replied, his voice humble, lowering his head, "I can go." The man gestured for him to follow, while the woman stood behind, arms crossed, her face a mask of fury. As they walked to the car, Tomas felt a mix of emotions, a glimpse of hope, but also a deep fear that this decision might bring problems. Yet something inside him told him he shouldn't regret it, that maybe, for the first time in his life, he was about to take a step that would change his fate. When they arrived at the car, the man opened the back door and signaled for him to get in. The woman, unable to contain her anger, headed for the passenger seat, crossing her arms and staring out the window without saying a word. The tension inside the car was palpable, as if a storm could explode at any moment. During the drive, the man tried to start a conversation with Tomas. "Tell me, Tomas, how long have you been living on the street?" Tomas hesitated before answering. "Since I can remember, sir," he murmured. "My parents, well, I don't know them." The man nodded but didn't ask anything further. Tomas was surprised. He was used to adults interrogating him, wanting to know everything. But this man seemed more interested in listening to him than questioning him. Finally, they arrived at the house, an imposing mansion with a well-maintained garden and high walls protecting it from the outside world. The woman quickly got out and entered without looking back, disappearing through the front door like a shadow. The man and Tomas stood outside for a few seconds in silence, as if the place were a sacred space to be respected. "Come in," the man said, and Tomas followed him, trying to contain the fascination the place stirred in him. As they crossed the threshold, a warm light enveloped him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the cold no longer biting at his skin. The man led him to a small room where they sat across from each other. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. Rather, it was a silence filled with understanding. "I want you to tell me everything you saw today," the man finally said, his voice soft but firm. "It doesn't matter what it is, just tell me and I will listen." Tomas nodded, took a deep breath, and began to recount every detail, from the moment he saw the woman at the restaurant to the kick she gave him and the fear he felt when he saw the man about to eat something that could harm him. As he spoke, the man listened silently, his face reflecting a mix of sadness, disappointment, and something Tomas couldn't identify. When he finished his story, Tomas felt a weight lift from his chest, though he still didn't understand why the man had given him the opportunity to speak. "Thank you," the man finally said, with a slight smile. "You've done something that many people would have been afraid to do. I can't put into words what that means to me." Tomas looked at him, surprised. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone was seeing him, like his words mattered. That night, as the man offered him a warm corner to sleep in, Tomas realized that the decision to speak up and warn had changed something inside him, a small spark of hope he had never felt before. And even though he didn't know what the future held, he felt that maybe, just maybe, that night would be the beginning of something better. Distrust had rooted itself in the man's heart. That night, after hearing Tomas' story and facing his wife's words, he decided he could no longer ignore the signs. For the first time, the image he had of her began to crack. The next day, he decided to discreetly install a camera in his house, seeking answers to the questions that now tormented him. In the following days, he watched carefully, waiting for his wife to give any sign, any evidence that would confirm or refute his suspicions. At first, he only observed her daily routines, the small details of her life that seemed familiar but now appeared strange. However, that night, while reviewing the footage, he found something that left him frozen. On the screen, his wife was seen speaking on the phone, her voice in a low, almost whispering tone, but full of contained rage. She paced back and forth in the living room, occasionally glancing at the door to make sure no one could hear her. "I can't believe that a filthy, dirty, disgusting kid ruined everything," she said, with a mix of frustration and disdain. "He saw me when I put the substance. It was a mistake, I know, but I didn't expect some street brat to be lurking around there." The man felt his blood freeze at those words. The woman he thought he knew, the person he had shared his life with, was speaking with a tone and coldness that were completely unrecognizable. He kept listening, unable to look away from the screen, as his wife continued. "Don't worry," she continued, sitting down and crossing her legs. "The plan failed, but I'll find another opportunity. No one suspects anything, and he has no idea what I was trying to do." She paused, and her expression softened, becoming almost tender. "I just need you to trust me, Dad." The man felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. Those words hit him like a punch to the stomach. His wife was talking to her own father, his father-in-law, and beyond any suspicion, he was now discovering something he never imagined. His wife and her father shared an intimacy that went far beyond what was familial. The conversation continued, and he could barely process what he was hearing. "You know that only you and I have the clear vision for this family," she said softly, with calculated sweetness. "We can't let him get in the way. We can't allow his weakness to become an obstacle. If you weren't on my side, I don't know what I'd do." A silence followed her words, and he felt an indescribable chill run through his body. That confession was worse than he could have imagined. Not only were they hiding something from him, his wife was complicit with his own father-in-law, the man he had seen as a support, as an advisor, a pillar in his life. Now everything made a dark sense, and the betrayal seemed rooted deep within his family. On the screen, his wife listened intently to her father's response on the phone. Though he couldn't hear it, her expressions reflected a mix of satisfaction and complicity. This was not an accident, not just a lie or a mistake. It was a conspiracy beyond anything anyone could endure. His wife smiled, then ended the call with a sweetness that repulsed him. "I love you," she said, and those words, which he had heard so many times directed at him, were now for another man, and not just any man. It was her own father. The recording ended, and he stared at the screen, unable to move. He felt a mixture of rage, pain, and betrayal that threatened to drown him. The woman he had loved, the one he had entrusted his life to, had not only tried to poison him, but she was allied with the man he had considered his father. The life he had built with her now seemed like a farce, a lie orchestrated from the beginning. He slowly stood up, feeling the weight of that revelation on his shoulders. His mind was spinning, searching for an explanation, any clue from the past that could have warned him about this hidden truth. But all he could remember was his wife's smile, her caresses, her sweet words, which now seemed poisonous. Meanwhile, in one of the guest rooms, Tomas slept deeply, unaware of the secrets and betrayals surrounding him. To him, that house was a temporary refuge, a place where, for the first time, he had felt a bit of warmth and security. He couldn't imagine the chaos his warning had set in motion, nor the intricate lies that were beginning to be revealed. The man walked to the room where Tomas was sleeping and stood for a moment in the doorway, watching him. That boy, unknowingly, had saved his life. That boy, whom his wife had despised and humiliated, had become the only person he could trust now. The man felt an impulse to protect him, to offer him something he had never given anyone before, because now he understood that this boy was more than just a witness. He was his only hope to unmask this farce and take control of his life once again. At dawn, the man gently woke Tomas, not wanting to scare him. Tomas opened his eyes, blinking and looking around in confusion until he recognized the face of his host. He felt a mix of gratitude and nervousness, unsure of what else to expect from him. "Tomas, we need to talk," the man said, his voice soft but heavy with gravity. "What you told me, it's shown me things I didn't want to see, but now I need to face." Tomas nodded, still sleepy but attentive, and the man sat beside him on the bed. "There are things I can't explain yet," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "But I need you to trust me. You saw something no one else should have seen. Now everything has changed. My life, and maybe yours too, is in danger." Tomas straightened up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I just wanted to help, sir. I didn't expect." He hesitated, afraid he had caused more trouble. "I didn't know this would happen." The man placed a hand on his shoulder, and for the first time, Tomas felt something like an embrace, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. "You don't have to apologize. You saved me. I'm only asking you to trust me a little longer. I need you to stay strong, because if all this falls apart, you might be the only one who knows the truth." Tomas nodded, his gaze filled with an unusual seriousness for a child his age. For the first time, he felt that his life, marked by abandonment and misery, might have a deeper purpose, a reason he hadn't understood until now. He knew something dark was lurking in that house, something that made him tremble, but he also felt that he couldn't turn back. And as they prepared to face what awaited them, the man understood that his true battle would not be just against his wife, but against the web of lies and betrayals that had been hidden for years within his own family. Now, with Tomas by his side, he was ready to unravel the truth, no matter the cost. Hours later, Tomas was in the small guest room, in a house that still felt like a strange and luxurious world, far removed from the streets and dirty corners he knew. Although he had only spent one night under that roof, the boy couldn't sleep well. A mix of unease and responsibility weighed on his mind, a burden he had taken on without having truly decided it. He thought about the man, his words, and the broken expression he had seen on his face when he thanked him. It was more than he had expected, but he also felt a fear that tightened within him. There was something he still hadn't told him. That same night, after seeing the woman do that in the restaurant, he rushed back to the trash bin. Something inside him told him he needed evidence, something tangible to prove he wasn't lying, that his words weren't just the whisper of a homeless boy trying to get attention. So, with his stomach churning and his nerves on edge, he approached the container and, searching through the restaurant's trash, he found the small glass jar the woman had thrown away. He looked at it for a moment, noticing the residual stains of a clear substance stuck to the bottom. He knew that jar was important, though he wasn't sure how much it could help him. His instinct told him to keep it, that it was better to have it, in case he ever needed it. However, he hadn't shown it to the man. He had feared the jar might make things worse, that he would think he was obsessed, or even that it would get him into bigger trouble by involving him in something so dangerous. He tucked the jar into the inner pocket of his worn-out jacket, keeping it as his secret, and made himself a promise to show it only if it became necessary. That morning, the man entered the room and found Tomas awake, sitting on the bed with his feet hanging, staring at the floor as if he were lost in deep thought. The man approached slowly, touched his shoulder to get his attention, and Tomas looked up. "Good morning, Tomas," the man greeted him, with a soft voice, trying to show warmth despite the weight he carried in his own heart. Tomas nodded, barely responding with a good morning, his voice low but alert, as if he were ready to hear something important. The man sat beside him and looked at him seriously. "I know all of this must seem very strange to you," the man began, pausing to observe Tomas' reaction. "That someone like me brought you here and asked for your help with something so complicated." Tomas lowered his head, uncomfortable for a moment. He felt torn between gratitude and fear for having gotten himself involved in that situation. His hand touched the edge of his jacket pocket where the jar was still hidden. "It's strange, yes, sir," Tomas murmured. "I never imagined someone like you would ask me for something like this. But I can't help but feel that I need to help you." The man smiled faintly, touched by Tomas' sincerity. He looked at him with a mix of sadness and gratitude, as if in that moment, that boy was the only person he could truly trust. "Tomas, what you did for me, you don't know how much it means. You've opened my eyes to things I preferred not to see, things I've ignored for too long." He paused and took a deep breath. "But there's something I want to ask you. I need to know if you've seen anything else, if you have any more details, anything that could help me understand what's really going on." Tomas' heart raced. This was his chance to tell him about the jar, to confess that he had tangible proof of the betrayal. But at the same time, a lurking fear held him back. He knew the jar could be the key, but he also feared it might get him into even bigger trouble by revealing it. However, seeing the man's sincere gaze, he decided to speak up. "Well," he hesitated for a moment. "After I saw your wife at the restaurant, I went to the trash bin and found the jar she threw away." The man looked at him, surprised, not expecting that detail. The seriousness in Tomas' eyes told him he was speaking seriously, that what he had to say was more important than he had imagined. "Do you have the jar?" he asked urgently. Tomas nodded, pulling the jar out of the inner pocket of his jacket. The man took it in his hands, observing the remnants of the substance at the bottom, and his fingers trembled slightly. It was proof, a confirmation that Tomas' story was real, tangible. However, it also brought a mix of fear and despair. The jar confirmed that the betrayal was deeper than he was willing to accept. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" the man asked, trying to sound calm, but the tone of his voice betrayed a slight anxiety. Tomas lowered his gaze, feeling guilty. "I was scared," he confessed. "I didn't want to get into more trouble. I just thought that if things got worse, this might help." The man nodded, understanding the boy's caution. He tucked the jar into his jacket pocket, knowing that this small piece of evidence was the only thing giving him certainty amidst a sea of doubts. "Tomas, you have no idea how brave you've been," he said, placing a hand on his shoulder in an affectionate gesture the boy couldn't remember ever receiving. "I know you've been through a lot in your life, and you probably haven't had the chance to trust anyone. But I want you to know that now, you can count on me, and you're not alone in this." Tomas' eyes shimmered for a moment. He felt those words resonate deeply within him, as if the man was offering him something he had longed for, someone who valued him, who gave meaning to his life beyond the daily struggle to survive. "Thank you, sir," Tomas murmured, a mix of humility and hope in his voice. "I don't know how to help you more, but I'll do what I can." The man nodded with a faint smile on his face, and together they left the room. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, that the truth he was facing could destroy him, but he also understood that he had someone by his side, a small, unexpected ally who had shown more loyalty and bravery than anyone he had trusted before. With the jar kept as evidence and Tomas by his side, the man prepared to face the storm ahead. He knew there was no turning back now, that the truth had to come to light no matter the consequences. As they walked together down the hallway toward the main room, each step seemed to echo through the house, a reminder of the decision they had just made, to expose the betrayal, uncover the truth, and build a new life from the ruins of that lie. The house remained in an unsettling silence, as if its walls knew the secrets hidden within and were waiting for the moment when everything would explode. The man moved cautiously, placing the jar in his study, making sure it was well hidden. He knew that small object was a key piece in his search for the truth, but it was also a dangerous burden that could change everything in an instant. That night, after ensuring Tomas was fine and had eaten, the man retired to his bedroom, where his wife was waiting. Upon entering, he found her lying in bed, casually flipping through a magazine with indifference, as if nothing had changed. However, when she looked up and saw him, a shadow of suspicion crossed her face, though she was quick to hide it. "Is everything all right?" she asked, with a forced smile that had begun to feel increasingly false to him. He nodded, maintaining an impassive expression. It was strange how those simple conversations, once a part of his daily life, now felt like a silent battle. That everything's fine carried an unspoken lie, and both of them knew the distance between them had become insurmountable. "Yes, everything's fine," he replied, trying to sound unconcerned. A few minutes passed in tense silence, and he watched his wife out of the corner of his eye, a mixture of distrust and disappointment on his mind. He thought about Tomas' words, about the recording where she confessed her plan on the phone. The image of his wife had changed drastically, and now he looked at her like a stranger, wondering how long it had been without realizing who she really was. The next day, the man decided it was time to act. He asked Tomas to join him in his study, where he planned to talk to him about the steps they would take together. He wanted Tomas to understand that he wasn't alone, and that the evidence they had obtained together meant they were now in the same fight. "Tomas, what you've done so far is more than anyone could have expected," the man began, sitting beside the boy. "But I need to ask you for something more. I want you to be prepared, because things could get tough." Tomas looked at him, a mixture of determination and fear in his eyes. He knew this was leading him into unknown and dangerous territory, but he had come too far to turn back now. "Sir, I don't know how much I can help you, but I will do whatever it takes," Tomas said with an unusual seriousness for his age. "I just want this to end well." The man nodded, admiring the bravery the boy was showing, and gave him a pat on the shoulder, a gesture of trust and respect that seemed to bind them more than any words could express. "What we've done so far has set something in motion that can't be stopped," the man continued. "I know my wife has been plotting something with my father, and you were the one who opened my eyes. I don't want you to feel guilty for any of this. You've only given me the truth." Tomas nodded, feeling the weight, the burden that had tormented him, becoming lighter as he shared it. However, he knew that both his safety and the man's were at stake. They placed the jar in a locked box, and the man gave Tomas a copy of the key as a symbol of trust and an agreement between them. The following week, the man prepared to confront his wife, waiting for the right moment for the pieces to fall into place. In the meantime, Tomas stayed close, observing and learning every detail of this life that, although foreign, was beginning to have a special meaning for him. One evening, the man organized a dinner to finally speak with his wife, taking the opportunity to invite his father-in-law, whom he had until now considered a mentor and father figure. Tomas observed from a corner of the room, feeling like part of a crucial moment. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone seemed aware that something was about to be revealed. During dinner, the man, with studied calm, spoke about how much he had valued his relationship with his wife and father, mentioning the moments they had shared and the trust he had placed in them. Both listened, exchanging nervous glances as if they sensed that this speech was more than just a casual conversation. Finally, the man stopped speaking, looked at his wife, then at his father, his expression hardened, and said, "There's something I've discovered, something that makes me question everything I've believed until now." The wife and the father-in-law exchanged looks, trying to hide their discomfort. The woman tried to maintain her confident posture, but the father-in-law couldn't conceal the nervousness in his eyes. "What are you talking about, dear?" asked the wife with a smile that tried to seem innocent. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he responded, his voice firm and clear. "There's something you've been hiding from me, something that involves betrayals and lies. I don't want any more evasions. Why did you try to poison me?" The wife's face turned pale, and the father-in-law remained silent, his jaw clenched. She began to laugh, but her laughter sounded empty, desperate, as if she were trying to divert attention. "Poison me? That's ridiculous. Where did you get such an absurd idea?" she exclaimed, trying to maintain her composure, but the tone of her voice gave her away. The man took the small jar from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table, staring at her. The jar, that small object with the residue of the substance, became the focal point of the scene, an irrefutable piece of evidence of the betrayal she had tried to conceal. "Do you recognize this?" the man asked, his voice filled with a pain he hadn't felt in a long time. The woman couldn't respond, her eyes filled with rage upon seeing the object she had feared so much. She knew her game was over, that there was no way to deny what she had done. However, instead of admitting her guilt, she cast a hateful glance at Tomas, who watched the scene from the wall, trying to remain invisible. "Was it that boy? Was it him who put these ideas in your head?" she yelled, with uncontrolled rage. The man slowly shook his head, not breaking eye contact with her. "No, it was the truth that opened my eyes. And not just about what you did, but about who you really are." The father-in-law, who had remained silent until now, slowly got up, trying to calm the situation. "Son, I think you're misunderstanding all of this. You don't know what's really going on." The man looked at him with a mixture of contempt and sadness. "Misunderstanding? After hearing your conversations? After discovering the truth about your intentions? No, Dad, this time I'm not going to let you decide what I should think." The wife, trapped, lashed out at Tomas, approaching him with a fury that surprised everyone. "It's all this filthy little brat's fault. He ruined everything," she screamed, her voice full of venom. But the man stepped in, pushing her away firmly. "Don't you dare blame Tomas. He only showed me the truth you tried to hide. And now you have to face the consequences." Tomas watched, feeling a mix of fear and relief as he saw that the truth had finally come to light. Though he had feared the confrontation, he felt that, somehow, it had been worth it. He knew his life would change forever after this, but he also felt that the man, the only one who had ever offered him a helping hand, could now start anew, free from the burden of the lies that had surrounded him. The dinner fell into silence, and everyone present understood that this night not only marked the end of a farce, but the beginning of a new truth. A truth that, although painful, finally freed Tomas and the man from the shadows of the past. Hours later, the house was in a deep silence, broken only by the echoes of the revelation that had taken place during dinner. That night, when the truth was laid bare in front of everyone, it left behind a void and, at the same time, a kind of peace. The wife had left, taking with her her wounded pride and her secrets, and the father-in-law left in silence, without goodbyes, like a shadow fading into the night. The man remained in the living room, lost in thought, with Tomas sitting beside him. It was a shared silence, but no longer tense. It was the silence of those who feel free after having let go of a heavy burden. Tomas, still processing everything that had happened, glanced at the man, trying to decipher the whirlwind of emotions he must be feeling. Finally, the man sighed and broke the silence. "Thank you, Tomas," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there to open my eyes." Tomas looked at him, his eyes reflecting the gratitude and respect he felt for the man who, unknowingly, had become something like family to him. From the moment he decided to warn him about the poisoning, Tomas had followed an instinct he couldn't fully understand, but one that told him he needed to act, that the man's life was worth saving. "You don't have to thank me, sir," Tomas replied, lowering his gaze modestly. "I only did what I thought was right." The man nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Sometimes, doing what's right is the hardest thing. You taught me that, Tomas." The days passed with an unusual serenity, and little by little, the pain and betrayal the man had suffered began to transform into learning and reflection. He realized that despite having been deceived, he wasn't alone. He had Tomas, a boy who, against all odds, had given him loyalty and sincerity. This unexpected relationship began to change something inside him, giving him a sense of purpose he had long lost, even before discovering the lies of his wife and father-in-law. Tomas started spending more time at the house, and although at first he wasn't sure whether he should stay, the man made it clear that he had a place there. It was strange for both of them. The man, used to loneliness and emotional distance, found in Tomas a kind of anchor, someone who reminded him of the importance of second chances. And Tomas, who had known the harshness of the streets and the distrust that came with it, began to realize that he, too, deserved something better, a home where he felt safe. One day, while they shared a cup of tea in the garden, Tomas looked at the man and asked him a question that had been on his mind for some time. "Sir, do you think I'll ever amount to something in life?" he asked, his voice trying to sound casual, though his gaze betrayed a deep fear. The man looked at him, surprised. Tomas had been through so much, and yet, deep down, there was still insecurity, as if he felt the world would always be against him. Tomas, you already are someone. You're braver and stronger than most people will ever be, he replied, with a sincerity that moved the boy. Courage isn't in money or social standing, but in the ability to do what's right, even when it's hard. And that's something you already have inside you. Tomas smiled, a bit embarrassed, but those words filled him with hope. Throughout his life, he had felt like just a street kid, someone with no future, but now he was beginning to see that maybe he could build something different for himself. And you, sir? Tomas asked after a moment. Do you think you'll ever be happy again? The man paused, lost in thought, gazing at the horizon as if looking for an answer in the distance. That boy had restored his faith in humanity, and although the pain from his wife and father-in-law's betrayal still lingered, he felt that time, and perhaps Tomas' company would give him the strength to heal. I think so, Tomas. I think with time, I can find peace. But I also believe that happiness isn't something you find all at once. It's something you build, day by day, step by step. Tomas nodded, processing those words with the maturity of someone who had lived a lot in a short time. He felt that those lessons, simple yet profound, were something he would carry with him forever. Months passed, and life in the house began to change. Without the shadow of lies hanging over him, the man dedicated himself to renewing his home, his life, and his relationships. He began to see Tomas as more than just a boy who had accidentally entered his life. He saw him as an opportunity for redemption, to build a new life based on truth and respect. He devoted himself to teaching him, guiding him, and offering him something Tomas had never had, a sense of belonging. One day, while they were walking through the city center, the man stopped in front of a school and looked at Tomas with a serious expression, yet full of tenderness. Tomas, would you like to study here? He asked with a smile that reflected his desire to see that boy grow and fulfill his dreams. Tomas looked at him, surprised, his eyes sparkling with emotion and fear. Really? Do you think I could? Of course you can. You have a brilliant mind and a strong heart, Tomas. I have no doubt that you can do whatever you set your mind to. That day, Tomas started his journey at school, and although it was difficult at first to adjust, he found in the man a constant figure of support. Each day, he woke up with a sense of purpose, with the dream of building a different life, a life full of possibilities. And even though his past reminded him that life wasn't always easy, he now had something he'd never had before, a future. Years later, when Tomas was already a young adult, he sat next to the man, who by now was like a father to him. They both watched the sunset, remembering the dark days when the truth had come to light, when secrets were uncovered, and the most painful betrayals were faced. But they also remembered that, amid that pain, they had found something stronger than lies, the power of loyalty, courage, and unconditional love. Do you know, Tomas? The man said, looking at the horizon. Sometimes life sends us down dark paths just so we can learn to find the light within ourselves. And you, in some way, taught me how to find that light. Tomas smiled, feeling that those words contained the most important lesson he had ever learned. He knew his life hadn't been easy, but he also understood that this path had led him to discover his own worth, his own ability to overcome obstacles and find meaning in his existence. The man looked at him, proud, and they both stood in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting a final burst of golden light across the sky. It was both an ending and a beginning, a testament to the fact that no matter how dark the road may seem, there is always the possibility to build a life based on truth, respect, and hope. That day, both the man and Tomas realized that the true home is not a physical place, but a space built in the heart, where honesty and love lay the foundation. And as they watched the sunset, they knew that no matter what happened, they would always have each other, as family, as friends, as two souls that, in the most unexpected moment, found one another to offer a new opportunity to live in peace and fulfillment. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments. What would you do in a similar situation? We invite you to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends or family as a show of support. This motivates us to keep uploading exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that's about to appear on your screen. We greatly appreciate having you here with us, and you can click on the links appearing on your screen right now. We have an exclusive selection of captivating stories and guaranteed entertainment just for you. See you in the next video. A hug.